going to start here, just with a general question. How do you coach? And how would you coach this young person here riding down a hill? Maybe you can think back to, if you have children, how you perhaps taught them how to ride a bike, or just put it in another context. But we'll come back to this. Just have a mental note. How do you coach, and how would you coach up this person? So Alan mentioned the pillars of performance from an S&C standpoint. For me, when I think about throwing, there are three things that really matter for throwers, regardless of whether they're a pitcher or a position player: velocity, accuracy, and speed of release. But underpinning all three of those is health. It's really important. But whilst, of course, we want performance, and performance means doing well and doing all of these three things really well, if our arm isn't in shape, if our arm isn't healthy, and we're either having to take our foot off the gas a little bit, or worse, we're not able to play, then that's not working out for us either. So it's important that whatever we do and whatever environment we're in, we are thinking about, is this promoting healthy arm action? Is this promoting long-term performance? If we break down the pillars, so number one, velocity. Why is velocity important? Well, if you're a pitcher, it helps you do cool stuff like Garrett Cole right here, throwing 97 up in the zone. And if anyone has watched professional baseball, pitchers are throwing harder. They're throwing harder at the collegiate level. They're throwing harder at just about any level. And as a pitcher, velocity is always going to be your biggest differentiator. If you can throw 5 miles an hour harder than the hitters used to, you're going to have success. But also, if you throw harder, your breaking balls and off-speed pitches will work better. They're going to spin faster, spin harder. You'll get more movement. They'll be harder to hit. But velocity doesn't just impact pitchers. It's also super important for position players like outfielders, but even infielders. In order to make a play like this, you cannot do it without arm strength, which plays as velocity. Throwing hard isn't the only thing. It's also accuracy. Accuracy is super important. Obviously, if we think about it in the context of pitching, being able to command the zone and throw the ball where you want it to. But on defense, how many times have we had a player or seen a player do something like this? They field the ball cleanly, they've got a great arm, but they just sail it right over the top of the first baseman. So we need to think about how we're going to train accuracy, how we're going to develop it. And then speed of release. Simply how quickly can we go from fielding the ball to then moving it on to its next target, whether it's an underhand or overhand throw. So what next? Where do we go next? We've identified our pillars, and I would strongly advise you to think about what are your pillars of performance? I've got velocity, accuracy, and speed of release, but they are not fixed. You can have different ones. But once you've established what those pillars are, where do we go? And I like to think about pitching and throwing mechanics as three big rocks, three things that we're going to target in this sphere of complexity that is how you throw. Let's simplify it so we can understand the most important things, and crucially, so our players can do the most important things. And I like to define them as three rocks. So these three things, they are not the only thing that happen in the pitching or throwing action, but they are, in my opinion, the three most important: a stable back leg, a front leg brace, and good arm action. To give you a sense of what we mean, stable back leg, if you look at Marcus Stroman here, that position in his back leg, that angle, it looks strong, it looks stable, but it's not about being a fixed position. It needs to be strong and stable through the pitching movement. So if we take a position like this, if you are familiar with old school coaching terminology, maybe you've used this yourself. I have as well. I've referred to this position as a balance point because it looks like this pitcher has got balanced. He's able to pick up his leg and he looks balanced, right? Problem is it's not balance point, because when we add movement, we can see that the pitcher is actually moving down the mound. His belly button, his center of mass, his hips are moving down the mound. His goal is to try and load power into the back hip, not necessarily be balanced. But when we go back to this still picture, we can see how that stable back leg plays in. So it's important as coaches or parents, we're thinking, not only is that back foot going to really drive into the ground here, but this isn't a balance point. A better way to think about it is just leg lift and think about what key positions come from it. And that other part of the stable back leg is this point, the hinge. And we mean hinge, hips need to be behind the heels. So as we move down the rubber, and we're about to throw to the catcher, our hips are actually getting behind our heels. We're not moving too much side to side. It's not drop and drive. because if we go back to that belly button, that center of mass moving towards the target, it's not just drop and down, but we're moving gradually towards the home plate. The goal is so that we can hold tension in the back leg. And the reason that's important is so that we can achieve this here, which is rotating into landing. I'm going to say it again, and I want you to just watch how his back leg moves. Yes, there's a bit of a drop, but he's moving towards the target. Yes, he gains ground towards the plate, but he's not jumping or pushing off the rubber. It's important that we're actually trying to rotate. Keep that back leg stable so you can rotate into landing. So, front leg brace. What do we mean by rock 2? So that we establish, we're talking about the moment from when the front foot makes contact to ball release. And specifically what we're looking for is this front hip and knee to be stable. And if we put this green line over the top, you can see once his foot is in the dirt, his knee doesn't move towards home plate. If anything, it moves backwards. So that's an indication that he's got a strong, stable leg. If you look from the front angle, you can see that his knee, again, once it plants, is stable. It's not moving either side. It moves a little bit after ball release. I'm not worried about what happens after ball release. I want that leg to be stable into ball release. You might see it as knee extension. Justin Verlander here has a very extended leg, almost hyperextended. That's caused by the front hip pulling back, not necessarily him bending or straightening his knee. Other pitchers, Bow here, can maintain a bent leg while he's performing the same position. The goal, though, is we do it early and with force. So we're putting the force into the ground, and it's happening early in the delivery. It doesn't matter if you get front leg brace after the ball's gone. It's got to happen before. And we're looking for that whole foot contact. We see Clemens here. You can see as he comes down the mound, that whole foot. It's not his toe. It's not his heel. It's whole foot. And then finally, arm action. What do we mean by good arm action? 3 things. Number 1, we want to match the plane of rotation. So we look at Garrett Cole here. His head is in line with his spine. His elbows in line with his shoulders. It is the torso that determines his arm slot. So everyone is kind of a sidearm thrower, but whether they're sidearm 3/4 or over the top is determined by how much they tilt their torso. Case in point, I can make Cole here sidearm thrower, or I can make him over the top. Next, we have arm is up at front foot contact. Things we're looking for. The elbow is at or slightly above shoulder height. Slightly below. We don't want that elbow above shoulder. The elbow is flexed. So it's either either at or slightly less than 90. So it's straight up or it's slightly closer to his head. We don't want that arm any longer. The arm is up. So it could be, if straight up is 90, flat is 0, and if his hand was below his elbow, that would be less than 0. It could be anywhere between 45 degrees and 90. Even 0 and 90 is probably okay. But the key is the arm is up. We're not going to let that ball get down. And then we're looking for that ball to be facing the same direction as his chest. So here's an example of where the hand is below our elbow. This isn't a particularly strong position. We want to avoid it where possible. And then the final piece is to decelerate. And what we're looking for is the throwing hand is whipped past the front hip. Glove hand is out the way, so it's not inhibited their ability to rotate. And the head is still in line with the spine. Something I want you to notice as well is this isn't a great fielding position. I don't believe we should be coaching pitchers to finish in a great fielding position. Our primary responsibility should be that they are optimizing to throw efficiently so they stay healthy, throw hard so they can throw with more velocity. And that might mean that they don't finish in a great fielding position. If they do and they can field the ball, great. But if they don't, let's not stress about it. That shouldn't be what I believe is the most important thing that we're teaching. Okay, so we've got our 3 big rocks. But how are we actually going to train them? And I've got some drills that are going to key on those different areas. The thing I want you to understand is I want our throwers to try to stop thinking about mechanics. The more they think about the mechanics, the harder it actually becomes to execute the throw. We want them to start becoming their own best coach. So even though I'm sitting here as a coach and I'm trying to help them through and solve their problems, the more that they can take ownership of it, the more they understand what's going on, the better. And I kind of view the same thing, as a parent when I'm working with my children in whatever problem they are. If I can empower them to learn what they're doing and they can start making their own solutions, all the better for their long-term development. Single leg throws is something we've introduced in the last 12 months, and I absolutely love it. It's a great catch-all for so many reasons. I mean, it's what it says on the tin. We're standing on one leg so that we can work on single leg stability, and we're trying to get that good, stable core to elicit good rotation. It also helps us set up throwing on the run. So key points for us. We can stand on the front leg or the back leg. You can also go to lower arm slots. We can go to 3/4, sidearm, or even lower. Key, though, is we do want to brace our core. And this is kind of one of the few mechanical cues I will give, is think about bracing your core so that you can connect the top half to the lower half. One of the nice ones I like to use is ribs down. It's something that Marcus Stroman thinks about right before he's about to pitch. He gets his back foot into the rubber, takes a breath, and then just thinks ribs down, just to connect his core, to connect his torso to his legs, boom, and then throws. And then from there, once you've got that, it's just throw. As I said, I don't have any other mechanical cues. Make sure you're on one of the legs, brace your core and throw, but we do want them to finish in a controlled position, again, just to reinforce that single leg stability. But wait, isn't throwing sidearm from the side bad? I've heard that throwing sidearm is bad. But again, it's about tilting the torso and making sure the arm slot matches the plane of rotation. So as long as the arm stays on the same angle, we can tilt and get to a lower slot. Just remember that the lower the slot you get to, the more extreme the player is going to need to tilt their torso. Jump back throws. So this targets that stable back leg. In general, it's going to promote athleticism. But again, we're going to come back to that cue of bracing core. Right before the move, I want to check that the athlete is bracing their core. Are they setting themselves up to be athletic? And then it's simple as just jump and throw. Things that I want to avoid on a jump back is getting stuck on my back leg. You can see here in this video, there's a little pause, and maybe I'll tolerate that at first, but really I want to see that center of mass, those hips moving towards the target as much as possible. Remember, just remind ourselves of this position here that Cole gets into. Number 2 is tilting the shoulders and hips back too much. If we look at Cole, you can see how level his hips and shoulders are, so I don't want to jump back and tilt back too far, and then pushing or jumping forwards. I want to make sure that I'm rotating into landing. And then, of course, if I forget to brace my core, then we're in a bad position. No stride throws. This is working developed on the front leg brace. It also works on rhythm and timing, specifically noticing when the hands separate and how they interact with that front leg as it goes down and moves away. So you can see as I rock back, my hands separate. I'm trying to get that cue. I want to make sure that my feet are at least stride length apart, or sorry, not at least, but at stride length apart. And again, come back to this brace core before the move happens. And then the movement is simple as just rock forwards, rock backwards, and throw. Things to avoid when doing no stride is too narrow a stride. So in this setup, you'll notice that my feet are a little bit closer together. And what you'll see is this now is the throwing position I get up to. Sure, my arm's up in a fairly good position with my top half, but lower half, you can see how my knees got past my ankle. I'm not in a great position to now brace that front leg. So do make sure their feet are wider. Tilting shoulders and hips too much. I've done a pretty good job here, but I want to make sure that when I do rock back, I'm keeping my shoulders and hips in line as much as possible, trying to get to the same position here that Cole's given us. And then making sure the back foot and knee aren't dragging forwards, that they're staying anchored into the ground through ball release. And again, I'm going to keep coming back to it, but not bracing the core. And then the final one is positional throws. So I love to use backhand and catcher's throws, not just for infielders and catchers, but for pitchers too, because it helps us develop an efficient arm action. We want that rotation in the throw. We want players to be able to turn. And we find that when they turn quicker, when we give them permission to spin and move quicker, they actually develop a more clean and more efficient arm action. So the things we look for is set up as if fielding a backhand at third base, engage the torso and legs, and it might help to film it. But when I did this myself, I noticed that the first couple reps, I wasn't getting into my legs enough just by looking at my own video, and that proved its own coaching cue. I was coaching myself up just with the help of video. And it's as simple as turn and throw to first base, but it might help to plot that back foot first. On catcher's throws, So again, I don't mind if you're a catcher or not. I think this is a great throwing drill for developing efficient arm action. Make sure that you can set up in a catcher's crouch. And in particular, that means the heels are down. If you look at my feet, and this is a problem we see a lot of young catchers, is their toes are up. So get their heels down, get them plugged into the ground, and then just have them throw quickly. Go as fast as they can. And then think back foot to front foot. Get that back foot to the front foot and throw. So those are the drills. And my final points here I want you to consider is how can you use your language to coach? How does it help us? And to illustrate this problem, here is Pedro Martinez talking about his release point when he pitches. This is where he believed he needed to get to in order to throw. And yet, this was his actual release point. So it's really important that we understand that there is a difference between what the player might feel versus what's really happening. So I want you to consider how you match your language to their experience. And ask the player, what did they feel? So on this jump back throw, if they aren't feeling the things that you think they should be doing, but they're doing them, then that's your coaching cue. That's what you need to remind them. You don't need to force them into stable back leg, drive the back heel into the ground, corkscrew the foot. You don't have to necessarily use that. If they tell you, oh, hey, well, I just kind of feel like my knee's doing this, or I even feel it in my left earlobe. Great. If the movement's good, go with what they feel. So in summary, let's come all the way back to being their own best coach. What would you do to help this player out? Because if we teach them like we normally do with throwing, and we start talking about wrist position, elbow position, do this with your elbow this high, step here, don't throw too hard, always got to hit a spot. Chances are this is the type of cyclist or thrower we're going to end up with. So I want you to encourage them, give them freedom. Coach, as Liam said, coach to the problem, give them the freedom to explore velocity, give them the freedom to explore accuracy and speed of release. Because if you give them that freedom, you just might see some pretty cool things, whether it's riding a bike or actually throwing a baseball. So think about your throwing performance and your performance of pillars. What are the biggest 3 rocks for you if they're different to me? And mind your language. So